Well, I might dive in. So, Vaso, thank you so much for joining us on the Foundation series. I feel like this has been one of those things that's been such a long time coming because I know you just mentioned before we got started that you appreciate my LinkedIn content. I absolutely appreciate your LinkedIn content as well. So I think we've been fanboying and fangirling each other from opposite ends of the world. But it's a real pleasure to have you on the show and to speak with you through this episode. But I'd love you to just spend a minute introducing yourself, who you are, where you're from, what you've been up to in your past, and kind of give people a good understanding about you.
Yeah, sure. Well, for one, thanks for having me, Matt. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation. Um, so I'm Vaso. I'm the Chief People Officer here at Ravio. Ravio is a compensation and workflow tool that aims to make comp work for everyone, for HRDs like us, comp leaders, CFOs, employees, everyone, everyone across the employee stack. Been here for, oh my God, yeah, three and a bit years. So ever
It's gone
since our
quick.
inception, which has been really exciting. Prior to Ravio, I was at TrueLayer. TrueLayer is, well, now it's a payments company, but had joined there when we were 40 people just before COVID and led the scale journey there over the next sort of hectic 3.5 years. It grew TrueLayer from 40 to 440 across 12 countries. So big hyperscale journey there. Had a great time there. Wouldn't have left had it not been for this opportunity with these folks solving this problem for people like us. And yeah, prior to that, was at Deliveroo, where we again sort of went through crazy hyperscale journeys. I was lucky enough to be one of the first 30 or so employees and left after a wonderful but also hectic and really hard journey of the next 4 years. So another hyperscale journey. So I would say I have made all the mistakes in the world, especially in regards to comp, which is why I'm so excited to have joined Ravio and help solve this massive pain point for companies and for people.
I love it. Thank you. Thanks so much for the introduction. And yeah, wow, those sorts of environments are just ripe for mistake making, but also the lessons. And yeah, excited to hear about some of those experiences that you had from the first couple of scale ups and how you may not be applying it at either Ravio or beyond at some of the companies Ravio support. So that's exciting. In today's episode, I'm really excited to dive into something that I think is a little bit of like a forgotten thing when it comes to compensation. There's a lot of things that I know I'm guilty of talking about is like the exciting parts of like building a compensation philosophy, but not really talking about what happens once you've actually written the document. Where do we go from there? How do we actually turn philosophy and everything written down into practice? And really operationalize the compensation philosophy. So excited to spend this episode talking about that. Maybe starting at a high level, what's been your experience at either some of the organizations that you mentioned previously? What's your general thought process from defining the compensation philosophy to where next?
Yeah, great question. So I think I would start with it's never too early to define the comp philosophy. So, this is a lesson that I bear the scar wounds from.
Yeah.
So it is so much more painful to try and retrospectively either fix a non-existent comp philosophy or to introduce one, 4 years after a hyperscale journey where everything is all over the place. So fixing retrospectively is way harder than starting incrementally with a simple comp philosophy from the early days, like first 10, 15 employees, you can get a skeleton comp philosophy ready at that early stage. So I think, yeah, number one, it's never too early. Even if it feels really early, it's really not, right? So that's the first lesson that I think I would take away. And the other thing that I would mention, like just at a very high level, is to keep it as simple as possible. We don't need to over-engineer. It's great to have a really detailed, data-orientated, super mature comp philosophy that you roll out to your organization. And that might be appropriate for, for an org. For example, for Ravio, I would say we have a really mature comp philosophy, but it kind of works because that's what we're meant to do. But for most companies, that might be a little bit of an overkill. So don't hesitate to start early with something super simple, and you can always build on it incrementally, whether that's, at 6-month intervals or annually. Just building incrementally will get you to a better position than having to do it at once.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. And I think so often there's like, I guess you can be obviously incredibly strategic, and I'm sure Ravio is one of them, but like incredibly strategic when it comes to your compensation philosophy. And you can kind of run all these workshops, you can do all these things to make sure that it's going to support your business. But so often I find myself talking to people who are like, where do I start with a comp philosophy? And it's like, just write down what you're doing now. Even something as simple as like just sort of codifying how often you review salaries. Do you have kind of a semblance of a job level framework? How do you think about pay? What are the things you do today that you want to make sure that you're adhering to, but also communicating to your people? Because to your point, like if people across the business and particularly as you start to add like management layers and things like that, if they're not aware how compensation is going to work, by the time you scaled from 40 to 400, like the damage in some respect is done, right? Because people have gone off and kind of worked in their own compensation philosophy. So yeah, I always encourage people like, just write down what you're doing now, just draw a line in the sand. And again, the earlier, the better. It doesn't have to be super complicated, and then take it from there.
Totally, totally agree. And I would also say, in the absence of any documentation, people make up their own stories. Like that's always the
So
case.
true.
So,
Yeah.
just get it down. It'll be fine. You can always build on it as you go along. But don't let the silence lead to noise, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree.
Mhm.
All right. And then so once companies have taken that leap, hopefully the sooner the better, they've defined it, whether they've gone through the process of really running compensation philosophy workshops and engaging with their employees, whatever their approach has been to get to a compensation philosophy. Where do you think companies should start when it comes to going, okay, we've got this thing now, we've defined how we think about pay or how we operate pay. What's sort of next in terms of bringing it to life?
Yeah. Well, I think just to add to like how to get to the comp philosophy bit,
Yeah.
I do think that there's also a bit around making sure that you've aligned with whoever the main decision maker is apart from the HRD.
Yeah.
So, I've only ever worked in founder-led businesses, but I've definitely made the mistake where I have pressed ahead with what I thought was an amazing comp philosophy that I believed in, only to have my wonderful founders reach out and say, "Hey, actually, I disagree with this." And my pushback of, "Hey, I shared this with you, and you didn't give me any feedback, despite having asked a bunch of times," was like, "Yeah, sorry, I hadn't read it. I've read it now. Don't like it." Meaning I had to go back to the drawing board. So, make sure that it is not a democracy, but make sure that, the people that can pull it back, they need to definitely be on board before we, go to the public.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. And I think like I've been there before as well, by the way. So I think we both have the battle scars from that one. I would even
Yeah.
delve down on that and say, like, it's not even sometimes, it's not even just enough sometimes to put it across like the executive's desk or something like that. Like you really have to, I guess, really emphasize the kind of knock-on effects this is going to have. I think so. I mean, so
Yeah.
true that they have to be bought into it because, of course, you don't want to be left, carrying the bag and being expected to explain decisions that executives or the CEO or founder have decided they don't agree with. That's one of the biggest challenges I found. But I've found even going through what I think was enough of a consultation process with executives wasn't, and I found them getting a little flaky in some high pressure scenarios. So, much like there's probably not a point where it's too soon to bring a comp philosophy in, there's also not enough you can do to make sure people understand the impacts and the effects that something like a comp philosophy is going to have across the business.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more. And I think another top tip is making sure you agree with those folks what the principles are for exceptions to the comp philosophy. It might be there are no exceptions and everyone's fine with it, but you need to stress test it a little bit. So if we've had a cloud security engineer role open for 9 months, which we've not filled, does that what would that mean? Does that trigger okay, we're going to change our work from office policy, etc.? So agreeing principles for an exception, I think, is really important.
100%. And I think you're hitting on something that's so important to absolutely comp. But I think my sense is that, to use the more old school term like HR, I think we can be really guilty of this as a profession in the past, where we've maybe been like the guardians of the policy, or we've been the ones who really defend these things, to the nth degree and no matter what. And I think so often we need to realize, it's there to enable our business goals and to be able to achieve certain things, right? So if it's not, or if it's acting against that, then how do we make sure that we're realizing that and taking a more iterative approach? Also, and I was just having this conversation with someone recently, I think taking the approach with compensation philosophies of, we think we've got this right. Like, we've made a decision that we think is right for us, but not being too sort of fixed mindset around how compensation's being done as well. I'd love to get your thoughts on what are some ways that you can kind of help a company realize that, hey, we've done this thing that we think is right for us. It may evolve over time, but it's not this sort of fixed thing that is going to, exist forevermore.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've said it perfectly. So I think going out to the employee population with the philosophy documented, with the principles for exception if there are, if
Mm.
relevant, documented, but also being really honest and transparent and saying, look, a comp philosophy is just that. It's a philosophy. It will evolve over time. And there's likely scenarios that we haven't even began to imagine that will emerge, right? So this is a caveat that we will do everything we can to stay loyal to the philosophy. But bear in mind, typically we're still a young company. We may need to continue to stay agile, and we may need to iterate on this as we go along. Our commitment to you is that at these intervals, whenever you agree to renew the comp philosophy, we will be transparent to the extent that we can with the evolution, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I find, and again, this was something that I feel like I only really recently discovered in the last sort of companies that I worked internally for, but it was it felt like it gave me a bit of breathing room and the team a bit of breathing room, not to feel like we have to get this thing perfect the first time, but it also gives people a sense that, hey, this is something that you can have a say in. This is something that fundamentally has to attract and retain and motivate the right people. So if you're telling us that it's not doing that, or if there's some other KPIs or something that indicate that it's not working, we're absolutely going to keep our eyes on those things and make sure that we're, fixing it and revising it until it can do what it needs to do. And I think that just gives people a sense of okay, great. I actually kind of have some part to play in this, and it's not just whatever the hand is that I'm dealt.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love this idea of involving the employee population as their own sort of advocates. So, well, before Ravio existed at another workplace, we had a Google spreadsheet where folks could input, hey, this is my job description. I got approached for a role at this company that allegedly is paying this. And it was open for everyone to see. And it was great because it sort of gave us a sense check on, hey, are we lagging way below the market or higher than the market? And, we can never trust 100% the, crowdsourced salary data. But in our case, we found that it wasn't taken advantage of at all. And it was a great litmus test of what on earth is happening in the market. And
Yeah, I
that's
love that.
something that really helped at the time.
That's really cool. And it's obviously a very high trust environment that it's we want to field these things. And again, making sure that the door's open to discuss when pay isn't working effectively. I've not heard of that sort of approach before. That's really cool. That's so novel. And I'm sure just went on to shape and impact the culture in other ways when you can talk about something that's so fundamental to why people come to work, and to be able to have that discussion. I'm sure it sort of, flows through the organization and in other ways. I'd love to talk about something that I think tends to time well with when a compensation philosophy comes in, or at least in my experience, and I'd love to hear if it's yours as well. But certainly in early stage organizations that I've worked in, they've kind of gone from pay increases happen whenever, wherever, it's pretty ad hoc. It's pretty manager led to suddenly we've got this thing we've written that says that we do it every 12 months. How do you recommend, or maybe we can talk about some of the scars here.
Yeah.
What are some of the ways you think companies can get from that really messy, chaotic approach to actually no, we really want to be, concentrated and fair and consistent and maybe a little more planned when it comes to the budget around our comp review. How do we get through that transition?
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard. But again, starting early will help.
Absolutely. If there's one lesson people can take from this episode.
Yes, exactly. But I think overall, really presenting the organization with why it's so critical to stick
Mm,
to, a structured pathway. So if we look at everybody's comp review at the same time,
mhm,
then that will mean that the budget that we have allocated for compensation increases this year gets fairly apportioned to the
mm,
employees. So nobody, you know, who's due a pay increase in, say, November, and then we're like, well, the pot's run out. So,
yeah.
you've done well, but sorry, and there's nothing left in the pot, right? So talking about like the impact of, having the whole budget available for the whole
Mm,
population will mean that it's fairly apportioned. Explaining to people what happens in calibration meetings and why it's so important that the eligible population is covered in the calibration process, I think will go some way towards getting buy-in from the crowd.
yeah.
But I'd also recommend keeping a little bit of flexibility. So I do think it's okay to say, okay, we do our big comp review in whatever. For us, it's in Q4. But then, being transparent that, hey, we're going to have an off cycle in, say, April every
Mhm,
year. And that is to capture exceptional promotions, correct any mistakes that we might have made in the hiring process. So it might be that we hired someone and turns out, they were actually a lot more senior than we thought. So we will retain an opportunity
mm.
to look at folks on this exceptional basis within that 12-month period, because 12 months is a really long time in our world. I will say also that I think for very small organizations, it is important to keep a little bit of agility. So, if someone is due a promotion, and it's, I don't know, 7, 8 months before the comp review, then you really don't want them waiting around. Like, that's so demotivating to sort of feel that you're sort of stuck. So I think being transparent about, there will be times where, because we're a small organization and we have the ability to stay nimble and fast, there will be times where, we have to action a promotion or something else because of a business need, and we will do that, but we'll let you guys know. I think that's okay, basically.
Yeah, I think again, it just comes back to the point about being iterative, about listening to the business, about understanding where actually maybe we're holding ourselves back from running a compensation process that does reflect the kinds of things that we value and are important. I'm a big fan of the sort of minor, major review cycles, exactly as you've
Yeah.
laid out. So we look across the organization and then we look at case by case basis. I think it makes a lot of sense, especially when, as you mentioned, if someone's quite clearly been delivering at a level that is above their own for a sustained period of time, it's not just kind
Hmm.
of like, for a week or two. Do you really want to make them deliver at that level without being compensated at that level for, 7, 8, 9, 10 months or whatever it is? So it makes a lot of sense to create a bit of flexibility within the system. I'll caveat that by saying that I know at the moment we're obviously at an incredibly interesting market from a like AI skills perspective. I know I spoke recently to someone about like the concept of how often to refresh compensation data and things like that. And I think if you've got like AI people, it's probably a different ballgame at the moment. But again, this is where it just comes down to listening to your business and understanding like the different dynamics that are at play.
Yeah, totally agree.
What else do you see tend to be some of the like bumps in the road when it comes to bringing in that compensation philosophy? So, I mean, I know, from my experience, you're coming into an environment where you're, and maybe if you have been a little bit later to the game with the compensation philosophy, as I know a few of us have, it's like you're applying a level of structure to something that has been unstructured in the past. And so, and a real example of that is, the legacy pay inequities that start to pop up where maybe you've got some people that are paid beyond the salary ranges that you've now sort of espoused to stick to, or you've got some people that are paid below. What do you think is the right mentality to take as a head of people or a HRD when you're kind of trying to apply this shiny new philosophy that you've developed to a workforce that doesn't quite fit it?
Yeah. Well, look, the shiny new philosophy, version 1.0 of it should account for correcting the errors as much as is feasible within the budget. So
Mm,
that first version needs to allow for the corrections, or at least have a plan to fix the corrections over time in a way that is sustainable for the business. So I think you
mm,
can't have one without the other. There may also be a case for, in version 1 of the shiny comp philosophy, it's likely that there are levers that are, to some extent, confusing the numbers. So, for example, it might be that one of the first few employees might be a little bit underneath the target-based salary for
mhm,
a particular role, but it might be that their equity package is actually worth tenfold what some other employee who joined later on in that role is earning. So there is value in that. And I think any logical person can understand that, okay, there's this disparity on the base, but hey, there's this massive disparity on the equity side, which works in my favor. So, it's a little bit of compromise, mix and match with a view to
mm.
getting to something that's equitable in the future. But I think, just bear in mind that there may be other scenarios that help the sort of simple base salary inequities that come up. Otherwise, yeah, I think, if you can fix the problems as quickly as possible, then that's great. Or at least have a plan that is communicated to the executive leadership, whoever, of how we're going to fix these inequities over time, but with dates. So, in October, we're going to do this. In April, we're doing this. And then by November of next year, we'll be in a good
Yeah,
place.
we'll be all aligned. No, I love to hear it. And actually that's an interesting sort of topic when it comes to pay transparency and just how big this is coming. You're obviously in Europe where,
Mm.
there's a whole lot of change happening, but even across the world, there's change from not only a legislative perspective, but certainly a social perspective. I speak to a lot of companies. I mean, I'm obviously based here in Australia and the appetite for pay transparency is not any less here, I would say. There's definitely a lot of interest. We just don't yet you have the legislation. But for companies that are taking maybe that, step-by-step approach who can't implement a comp philosophy from a budget perspective all in one go, how do you think those two things tend to coexist? Or how do you see companies, I guess, talk about their compensation philosophy when maybe their pay practices will have to play catch up a little bit?
Yeah, it's a tension that is hard to bear. But I think, being honest with yourself and with the leadership team as to the legislation that is coming, and then what the impact will be for the
Mm,
organization, for its people. And of course, the impact of getting it wrong as well, which could
yeah.
be catastrophic, right? So, yeah, I see no way that an organization can not correct any pay inequity issues uh, pretty quickly without getting in hot water. Yeah, I'm really interested to see what will happen with the new legislation
Yeah, it's a
in
brand new world,
Europe.
isn't it?
Yeah, yeah,
All right,
yeah.
lovely. I think for me, like bringing this topic to a close and something that I think is probably near and dear to most like HRDs and ahead of people's hearts is like, how do you get the organization to really live and breathe the compensation philosophy rather than it being this kind of thing that's ours? It's like it's ours to explain, it's ours to discuss. Nobody else kind of gets it. How can you empower leaders? How can you kind of, I guess, lift the general level of understanding? And what are some of the practices that you've seen work really well when it comes to comp philosophy being understood across the business?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like a massive PR push or
Mhm.
propaganda push, whatever you want to call it. So I've previously lent on our marketing team to help me with an internal comms strategy, basically, on how
Mm,
to make this something that the entire population and the folks who keep coming in every month, make this something that is front of mind,
mhm,
understood at an early stage of an employee's life cycle at whichever company. So part of the
mm,
onboarding, but also making sure that people understand the mechanics behind
mm,
compensation. because it's hard. Like it's a hard subject to get your mind around. Yeah. So things like we run a session on comp philosophy that I own, and I talk people through our own comp philosophy. But then just to make it extra interesting, we have folks try and roll out a comp philosophy as if they were an HRD based on like old legacy data that we have from old school providers.
Yeah.
So, that mammoth Excel sheet that you need a job match and sort of fit people in. So we have employees try and do that and inevitably are met with a, what the hell is this? I cannot do this. This is impossible. And I'm like, thank you. This is how.
I'm feeling seen.
Yes, exactly. This is how problematic this, this section of HR is. Here's how we're fixing it. And by the way, here's the clarity on the comp philosophy. Do you have any questions? And, it's been really effective up to now. Obviously, folks who work at Ravio will be thinking about comp a lot, but it is a subject that, everyone is interested in, right? Everybody cares about what they're paid and how they're paid. So I do think that across any organization, employees will be really bought in to understand how they're paid. And frankly, it's a great skill for them to take on to wherever they go to next, to be able to negotiate from a position of strength and, have a great conversation with internal recruitment, a manager, whoever it is about comp.
Yeah, beautiful. I think that's like such a, I feel like that's a fun little exercise I would absolutely take to other workplaces now. That's incredible. A nice little sort of experiment for employees to get a sense of how it works. But I think to your point, like, again, taking that approach of like, let's understand how compensation decisions are made, that there is a balance of art versus science, help them understand like what parts of it are the science, but that the science is limited. It's not going to give you a perfect answer every time. You have to make some assumptions. You have to make some thoughts and processes and guesses around how this is going to work. And we're only doing the best we can. But so long as the goal is, mutual and we can all accept it, then hopefully we're all moving in the right direction. I love that. That was such another great takeaway. As we wrap up, any final points, any tips or tricks you would give to the audience, and if they were considering or on the verge of launching their own compensation philosophy?
Yeah, well, look, I think start as early as possible. Keep it simple to start and then build incrementally. Your data needs to be accurate. There is no world where you can roll out a comp philosophy that is defensible without a good data set. And you can start with one, and then hopefully once you have more budget, keep adding other providers and do all sorts of sexy stuff with combining the data sets. That's fine. But you need to have a solid data. And then, of course, your people data, so levels, job frameworks, taxonomies, etc. You need to get it sorted. So again, as early as possible, a great HRIS is your friend. You want to have all that data sorted in there, but that is step one. It's really hard to do. It's impossible to do without the scaffolding of the organization in place. And then, frankly, I think it comes down to communication. Keep getting it out there, keep getting it in front of people. Your line managers are your best friends. They need to hold the line. They need to understand. They need to have the script regarding, any questions that might come their way. So they need to be really enabled to deal with this complex issue when they're by themselves, in the room, holding the line with their team members. So really make sure that you've enabled them as well.
Yes, absolutely. Avoid them saying, I have no idea, speak to HR.
Yeah, hate that.
Absolutely. No, hands down, those are all amazing tips, and I couldn't more strongly agree. So thank you so much. Thanks for talking us through how to operationalize your compensation philosophy.
Thanks for having me. It's been great.